Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to do this beautiful pattern. Look at this. Now it's a one row repeat. It doesn't look it, but honestly this is a one row repeat on this pattern. Look at this. When it's down you can see the texture of these clusters running up in lines. You don't fully appreciate this blanket until you see it sort of on a diagonal. It's a beautiful textured blanket. It's completely reversible. It's the same on the back as it is on the front. If you wanted to put a border on this, it does have a really nice straight edge. If you wanted to put a border on it, you can just do some fans or even a border of UK treble crochets. This is beautiful yarn. This, I'll show you the yarn I've used for this. Look at that little glitz in there. This is beautiful. I love this yarn. I really do love this. And the yarn I've been using is this. This is King Cole Baby Glitz. This is beautiful stuff. It really is. It is so soft and it comes in lots of pastel shades. I got this on Lovecraft. The stitch count for this is 3 and I'm going to show you how to do it. It is quite easy. It's just puff stitches with a V-stitch. It's a beautiful pattern. So we're going to do our stitch count in sets of 3. Do as many sets of 3 as you want your blanket to be. Don't do the foundation chain too slack. You don't want it too slack. If it's too slack it'll be wider than the top. So just do nice and neat, compact little stitches and do them in sets of 3. So I'm just doing a little sample here with this. I'm going to add an extra 2 stitches, 1 and 2. So you're going to go into the 4th stitch in your chain, 1, 2, 3 and 4. You're going to do a V-stitch. So go into the stitch, we're going to do a UK treble crochet, 2 chain and a UK treble crochet. So that's 1 treble crochet. You're going to chain 2, 1, 2 and put another treble crochet into the same stitch, and that's called a V-stitch because it looks like the letter V. Now you've got your little chain here on the end as well. So there's your first V-stitch and you've got a little chain there. You're going to skip 2 stitches, 1, 2, and you're going to do a puff stitch. You're going to put your yarn over and into the same stitch 3 times. So put your yarn over and go in to the stitch. Pull your yarn through and keep it on the hook. Yarn over, so that's once, yarn over, into the same stitch, that's 2, yarn over and into the same stitch, that's 3. Don't worry about it pulling in a little bit. Put your yarn over and come through that little bundle. There should be 6 loops in there. If you can't get through all of them, then just come through a couple at a time. And you should have 2 loops left. Yarn over and come through both of those loops. And that's going to tie in your puff stitch. You're going to skip 2, 1, 2 and do a V-stitch again. So that's a UK treble crochet, 2 chain and a treble crochet. If you're in the USA or another country, that's a double crochet for you. So chain 2 and put another treble crochet into the same stitch to make that little V-stitch again. So you've got a V-stitch, a puff, so you'll have your chain of 3 here, a V-stitch, a puff stitch and a V-stitch. You're going to skip 2 chains, so skip 1, 2 and do a puff stitch again. So that's, keep that on the hook, pull it up just a little bit, yarn over and pull through, that's 2, yarn over pull through, that's 3. So yarn over and come through all of those loops there in that bundle. So you'll have 2 left on your hook. Yarn over and come through those 2 loops. Skip 2 and do a V-stitch all the way along. You're going to alternate it with a V-stitch. Skip 2, do a puff stitch. Skip 2, do a V-stitch. So we're on a V-stitch. That's 1 treble crochet, 2 chain and 1 treble crochet all into the same stitch. Skip 2, 1, 2 and do a puff stitch all the way along, and you should finish with a V-stitch, and we'll do a treble crochet on the end. So I've done my puff stitch and I'm going to skip 2 and do a V-stitch. Do my 2 chain and another treble crochet. Make sure I catch it right into that stitch. So this is what you've got. It looks a little messy, but don't worry about it. It will look fine once we build this up. Now I've done my last V-stitch and I've got 1 stitch left, and into that stitch I'm going to put a treble crochet. Now if you've got more than 1 stitch, just pick it out. So don't worry if you have 1 extra stitch. Just tighten that in and it will slide along. You're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, turn your work around. Now what you're going to do, in the V-stitch, you're going to do a puff stitch. And in the top of the puff stitch, we're going to do a V-stitch. And these are the 2 rows, you'll just keep repeating this. So we've got a V-stitch here on the beginning. You're going to do a puff stitch. So yarn over and into the middle of the V-stitch. Pull your yarn through, that's 1, yarn over, pull your yarn through, that's 2, yarn over and pull through, and that's 3. Now you're going to yarn over and come through that cluster, but leave that stitch, leave that little loop there on the end. Just pull through, you've got 2 loops, yarn over and pull through. Now into the top of the puff stitch itself, you've got a stitch there, so you're going to do a V-stitch. Just push your hook through the top of that puff stitch. Just push it through, pull your yarn through, and you're going to do your treble crochet, your 2 chain and your treble crochet. So from now on you'll put a puff stitch inside the V-stitch, and you'll put a V-stitch on top of the puff stitch. So we've got our V-stitch and our puff stitch. So into this V-stitch you're going to do a puff stitch, and that's what you're going to do on every row. 1, 2 and 3. Yarn over through the bundle, yarn over and through those 2 little loops. Now into the puff stitch, you'll see the stitch here, right here, into here, that I'm going to put the point of my hook in where that hole is and just push it through. Pull through. Nope, I didn't do a yarn over first. So do your yarn over, and where your puff stitch is, you can see that little stitch going across. Take the point of your hook and put it in there and push it through. Push right through. Pull your yarn through and you'll do your treble crochet, chain 2, 1, 2. If you're in the USA, that's a double crochet, and do another treble crochet into there. It's opened it up a bit so you can see it better. Go across to the V-stitch, skip the space, into the V-stitch, you'll do a puff stitch. So yarn over and 3 times into that space. 1, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over and in and pull your yarn through 3 times. Yarn over and come through that big cluster. Leave that loop there. Just pull through. You've got 2 loops on your hook. yarn over and pull through. So I'm at my last two. I've got a puff stitch and a V-stitch and my little chain of 3 here. So into the top of the puff stitch we're going to do a V-stitch. Just push your hook through the top of that puff stitch and we'll do the V-stitch and chain 2, 1 more treble crochet into that same stitch, and we've got a V-stitch here, so we're going to put a puff stitch in there. That's 1, 2, 3 times in, through those loops, yarn over and through my 2 loops I've got left. Now into the top of this chain, count 1, 2 and 3 stitches. Into that 3rd stitch do a UK treble crochet, just 1 treble crochet into there, and that keeps your edge straight. And if you're in the USA, that's a double crochet. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, turn your work. So this is what you have. You've now got a puff stitch, then a V-stitch, then a puff stitch and a V-stitch. So now you've got a puff stitch here, you're going to put a V-stitch on top of this puff stitch. Then in the V-stitch you'll put a puff stitch. So you're alternating between a puff stitch and a V-stitch and a V-stitch and a puff stitch. The thing to remember when you're at a puff stitch, you always put a V-stitch in the top of it. And when you're at a V-stitch, you'll always put a puff stitch inside that V-stitch. So we've got our chain 3, so yarn over, you're going to do a treble crochet into the top of that puff stitch. Just push your hook through, pull your yarn through. So that's your treble crochet done. Chain 2, 1, 2, and into that same space as that other stitch, do another treble crochet. Then you're at the V-stitch, you'll put a puff stitch into the V-stitch. Yarn over, pull up, that's 1, yarn over, pull up, that's 2, yarn over, pull up, that's 3, yarn over, come through all of those loops, yarn over and through those 2 loops that are left. So move to your puff stitch and do a V-stitch in the top of that puff stitch. That's a treble crochet, 2 chain and a treble crochet. So in here you do a puff stitch. 1, 2 and 3, and get some more yarn. So yarn over through all of those loops, got 2 loops on my hook, yarn over and through, and then into the top of the puff stitch you put a V-stitch, and that is what the pattern is. Chain 2, this is beautiful yarn. So you're at a V-stitch and you'll put a puff stitch in. 2 and 3, and then you've got a puff stitch, so you'll put a V-stitch, and that's what you'll do. You'll alternate. Whenever you see a V-stitch you'll put a puff stitch in, and when you see the puff stitch you'll put a V-stitch. So it'll be puff stitch, V-stitch, puff stitch, V-stitch on the top of that. When you get to the end you'll do a V-stitch and do 1 treble crochet into the top of that chain. Chain 3 and turn, and then just repeat it. And what you're going to do is you're just going to keep repeating that. You'll just keep repeating puff stitch, V-stitch in the top of that one, a puff stitch, then a V-stitch, until your blanket is big as you want it. You'll start with a chain of 3, So again, wherever you see you've got a V-stitch, you'll put a puff stitch in. And then wherever you've got the puff stitch, you'll put the V-stitch in the top of it. And that's all you're doing. This looks really complicated, but it's not. It's only a V-stitch and a puff stitch, a V-stitch and a puff stitch. Don't go into that side or that side, you're going into the V-stitch. And that's it. It looks complicated, but it isn't. Make sure you don't do your foundation chain too slack. Normally I tell you not to do it too tight, but on this blanket don't do it too slack. And then just follow along row after row after row. V-stitch, puff stitch, V-stitch. And you'll get this beautiful pattern. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to my channel. And if you click on the bell icon, YouTube will tell you when I put up another tutorial. So until the next time, happy crafting, and I'll see you all again soon. Goodbye.